I recently got a couple of VPA heads. I got them from Broadhead Connection, which allows you to rent out expensive or high-end heads to evaluate them if you want to use them before you commit to buying. You rent the heads, use them for, I think it's 10 days, shoot them, look at everything that you care about, such as sharpening regimen. A head like this has to be resharpened, and then send them back. If these are the heads you want to go with, you've made an informed choice because you got the heads rather than committing up front to buying. So I'm looking at these to develop a sharpener that will do 35-degree bevels, which is what these happen to be. So I'm going to put these on the Sharpness Tester and then under the microscope to look at the edges beforehand. They feel very sharp. There is a noticeable burr on there, and again we'll look at it under the microscope to see. This is the, I believe, 200 grain. Now, and after you would practice with these heads and take an animal, you'd need to sharpen them anyway, so that's why I'm developing the 35-degree guide. So let's look at them under a microscope and put them through the Sharpness Tester, and we'll go from there. So now you've seen what the edges of both the 200 and the 150 look like under the microscope. New out of the package, unsharpened. They seem fairly sharp out of the pack. $3.89 for the 200 grain. And now the 150 grain head. $3.12. So those are pretty good. Out of the pack, they've got a great sharpness. Next, let's get a weight before I do any sharpening to them. The 150 grain is 152. We'll take that off, put it back on. 152. The 200 grain is 206. 206 grain. So they both come in a little heavy, which is okay. If you're going to shoot them and sharpen them, you're going to lose a little bit of weight. Not much. There's a real noticeable burr on the back side that wasn't broke off. I don't know if I'll feel it with this card. Yep. It stops and it hangs up right on the burr. And I think had they removed the burr on the back side, these would have tested far higher. Clean them up a little bit, and then we'll try them on the Sharpness Tester again. Let's look at the angle on the 35-degree guide with a 35-degree VPA Single Bevel. We'll set the roller on here. We'll slide it across its entire length. So it's a pretty good match. This is how it would look mounted. You want this edge parallel to the roller. So here is the orientation that I have the 150 grain head in the 35-degree guide. So if we look at it and we put a straight edge on the roller and we tip it down in, we are right at that 35-degree edge all the way around. This is how it would mount. You can move it away from the roller and change the angle a little bit by sliding it up the ramp. You can move it closer to the roller, sliding it down the ramp. You can physically move it out from the roller. That'll change the angle a little bit. But the true test is color it up with dark colored marker. In this case, I've got a Sharpie. I'm going to coat the whole edge. And because this is a new head, I'm going to start with 800 grit, which is what I've got on here. The other test to see if you've got it in the guide right is lay it on the roller, tip it, and if you've got good contact all the way along, you've got it mounted in there. If it rocks and rolls, or when you lay it down, this corner hits first like this, bring this end out. But I've got it mounted right on the money, but the sandpaper is going to tell us. So we're going to do a couple of real light strokes on the wet dry sandpaper at 800 grit to see how the marker wears. So we're there. We don't need to do any more alignment. So I'll go through 800, 1200, 2500. I'll do a little buffing compound on cereal box cardboard, and then we'll look at it again under the microscope and on the sharpness tester. Now that I've gone through all the grits, this last grit happened to be 2500. With any single bevel head, when you've sharpened this side, you've created a burr on the back side. The process for breaking the burr off on a single bevel is to lay the head flat. You don't want to create a bevel on the back side, and use that same grit that you used to create that burr to break off that burr. I just happen to be using a flat marble plate, but you place the head on there, tip it until it's flat, and break off the burr. Now the burr at 2500 grit is pretty darn small, so you're not going to notice a huge burr in there. In that case, you'd want a post-it note or a piece of paper so you could feel it, but I can tell you right now, it's getting pretty darn sharp at 2500 grit. Next, I'll use buffing compound on cereal box cardboard to strop the edge, and I'll show you that next. The last step in my typical sharpening regimen is just cereal box cardboard, white buffing compound. Draw it all over the cardboard. I kept the head in the guide after the last grit, and for buffing, it's only a reverse motion. Never roll into the cardboard or into the buffing compound. That would only cut the cardboard or scrape off the buffing compound. As you can see, it's already starting to turn black. It's eroding away a little bit of the metal. So I've sharpened this head on wet dry sandpaper. It's not super hard steel. I think it's a good balance of hardness for edge retention and soft enough that it'll sharpen well enough on wet dry sandpaper. Certainly you can use diamond plates, but I think wet dry sandpaper in this case is sufficient. Backward strokes. Stroke count, I don't know. This is a by feel thing. Now I'm going to wipe off. It'll always build up along the back side of the edge. I just wipe that off with my fingernail. I've got a little build up right there. It always will build up right there. Now I'll clean this off with a little paper towel. And now that's the edge that we have so far. You've seen every stroke. There hasn't been that many with the buffing compound, but we've got a rather mirrored edge on it right now. You can see the reflection in it. It doesn't hurt to go more, right? So the more buffing strokes that you make, the smoother you make that very fine edge. And I'll do a little bit more, and then we're going to put it under the microscope and on the sharpness tester to see what the effect was. Then we'll throw it on the scale to see how much weight we lost. sharpening at the 35 degrees that these heads are designed for with the 35-degree Stay Sharp guide. Now let's get a look at sharpness after sharpening. Here we've got the 200 grain. $150, and now the 150 grain after sharpening. $120. That's about as sharp as I've gotten any head after the honing process. So these heads can be taken to a great edge. Matter of fact, both of them finished out sharper than new razor blades. How do I know? Because I've tested new razor blades. Let's look at what they test at. Let's look at the 200 grain head now for the weight after sharpening. Gotta get it so you can see the numbers. 204. So again, you're not taking off hardly any weight when you're sharpening these heads. Again, these were new, but we took them sharper than a razor's edge compared to when we started. $152. So it hasn't changed a bit. It was $152 when we started. It's $152 now. Again, now this was a new head. I didn't have very much to do to it at all to get it to that level of sharpness. You run it through an animal, maybe hit a rock, and you have a few nicks to take out of it. You'll remove a little bit more material, but we're talking very small amounts. Should you get under 150 grains, you can buy weight washers in 1, I believe 2.5, 5, 10, 15 grain increments from a couple of online sources like Ethics and Three Rivers Archery. So this is a reusable tool. You take some weight off to remove a big nick due to blowing through an animal and hitting a rock. You can keep these at 150 grains by just adding some weight washers should you dip below the 150 grain mark. But I'm impressed with these heads. They seem to be made very well. The steel seems to be very good steel. I like that tip, so I'm impressed all the way around. Once you get these heads sharp, you want them to stay sharp, and you don't want them to corrode. These are not stainless steel. They will rust. And my two favorite rust preventatives are right here. Wipe them on a rag, or spray this on a rag, wipe it on the heads. Periodically do it during the season. As you take the head in and out of the quiver, you'll be wiping any corrosion inhibitor off. But I did a rather extensive review of corrosion inhibitors for archery gear. I will link that in the description below. But either of these on the heads will stave off rust. You work pretty hard to get these things sharp. You don't want them to get all rusty in your quiver. So what do you think? I think these are some pretty nice heads. The steel seems good. The design seems good. Now there is a simple way to re-sharpen them after use. Leave me some comments, opinions in the comment sections below. Thank you for watching.